Michigan did not accomplish what they wanted to accomplish last year. Offensively, it was so bad watching them send out whoever they were sending out a quarterback. It was so bad. All right. And the thing is you wasted one of the best defenses in college football
Yep.
on just not being able to play quarterback. So what do? They go get a true freshman quarterback. They go get Mikey Keene. They get Jake Garcia. Like all three, like this quarterback room, just from three names, those three names alone, like all those guys are probably starting last year, or at least seeing some action after the abysmal start we saw from like the other quarterbacks in this room. Uh, it, we have to see some sort of upgrade here on the offensive side of the ball because you do lose significant talent. You lose four really good football players, at least on this Michigan defense. And are you going to see the same level of production from that side of football? I'm not sure that you will, but this offense has to improve, right, CD?
Yeah, you'd hope so, right? It can't get any worse for our Michigan fans over here. I think it's at the same time, Bryce Underwood significantly raises your ceiling of your quarterback room, and then Mike Keene, Jake Garcia significantly raised the floor. Floor was bad last year. The floor is where you were at last year, and it was bad. It really bottomed out for you. You had to muck up games to win it. I mean, you just tried to lose that game against Ohio State, against the best team in the country last year, and your defense just didn't let you. It was incredible, right? It was obviously a great memory for Wolverine fans, but they expect a lot more than that. Coming off a national title game, win, right? So like obviously, I get that too. With Underwood, who I'm gonna like for all intents and purpose of this video, I'm gonna assume Underwood gets the job in week 1, and with how much you paid him and his kind of recruiting profile and what you're investing in him, I do not expect this to be a quarterback competition in the season. Like I don't think if we see Underwood struggle, it would be very surprising to see him get pulled. It would have to be really, really bad. And like for the sake of the kid, get him out there kind of thing, which I don't expect. I do expect him to have a higher floor just because of what he is athletically and physically gifted than most freshman quarterbacks when they come into the into the Big Ten. So that's the upside there in terms of like the downside isn't that bad, at least as bad as it was last year. So plus you get Chip Lindsey coming in, right? You talked about like hopefully can amp up this offense, kind of give it a jolt. Sharon Moore was the guy that called plays and did a lot of things for you, and now he's head coach, and it didn't work last year. And now it's Chip Lindsey's turn with the whole offseason to work with Bryce Underwood, Mikey Keene, even though he's been banged up a little bit. Obviously, Jake Garcia at lesser extent, but kind of figure out what needs to be fixed and hopefully hit the ground running because you're going to have Oklahoma and Nebraska, 2 tough road games early in the season in September before you hit your bye week where you can reset things and kind of attack October and Big Ten play. But those are important games early in the season. You talk about goals that Michigan wants to have this year. Goals, if you're an over-under win total person, those are significant games as well, which we'll talk about more when we get to the schedule breakdown at the end of the video. But yeah, I mean, what are your expectations for Bryce Underwood this year? What should be a realistic, like, okay, this is what we want to see from Underwood, and this is maybe a little bit more higher end in terms of what he can be this year.
You want to see him play in every single game, and if he does, I think the hope is like, and remember we're scaling us expectations for a true freshman, right? If he throws like for 3,200 yards and like 20 touchdowns, I'd say like that's pretty solid. Like we can, if you're a fan, I understand if you expect more than that. That's completely okay too, because I could see the higher end of that spectrum. I can see him absolutely going nuclear, right? And, throwing for 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, whatever it is, because he does actually have some pass catchers around him. I think that you maybe just didn't see enough of last year, even though you do lose some guys in your wide receiver room and you do lose Colson Loveland, who's really good. The supporting cast, I think, around Bryce Underwood is fine too. Like, if you were concerned about that at all, for this freshman coming in and like, oh, how much of an impact is it going to have in this offense? It probably will have a very significant one. All right, because you go to these skill positions and at running back, Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall. That is a really good one too, right? I get Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards, right? If you want to go by like the big names, I guess you could say that those guys are quote unquote better. But there's a world where Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall are just as good as those two guys last year.
Yeah, I think more so Mullings disappointed us. I know we were kind of lower on Edwards coming into last year than a lot of others were. He got a lot of hype being the cover athlete. Obviously, he had a great career at Michigan and helped him win a national title, did some big things when Blake Corum was injured, all that good stuff. So he's obviously a guy that deserves a world. Shame it didn't happen, come together last season for him and in the NFL. But yeah, I mean, Haynes is a guy that was all the talk of his essentially senior spring season or senior spring year at Alabama when he early enrolled. He was a guy that was flashing as a high school senior in the spring practices, never quite kind of lived up to that buzz. I think last year the expectations were pretty high. That whole run game struggled in general. I think a reset would be really nice for him. I don't necessarily see him being like an elite Blake Corum type of the best of the Big Ten because there's a lot of good running backs in the Big Ten. And then Jordan Marshall, even Donovan Johnson, right? How is he going to factor into this too? What kind of complement can these guys play to each other? Hopefully, you can kind of see one emerge to really, really kind of come into their own because of all the talent in that room. But at the minimum, I don't think it's going to be a big drop off. Like you said, I think last year you kind of underperformed. This year, you'll probably get somewhat replacement level play and then maybe with some upside to see if these guys untap that potential. And also, too, real quick, I mentioned like playing next to Bryce Underwood, what he can do with his legs and what you have to do to respect him. It'll be interesting to see what Chip Lindsey can draw up, and hopefully that helps the run game as well.
Yeah, I think Mullings was really good last year, and also too, you have to remember they were so one dimensional last
Yeah.
year. Like the fact that they had a run game at all, I thought was pretty darn impressive. And I think people were pretty frustrated with the offensive line last year, and I get it. It wasn't, what you had seen, the previous year where you just had absolute road graders, across that entire front. And so I think that this run game could I don't know if you want to say improve statistically, but it could be a little bit more consistent this year. If you have an extra dimension with Bryce Underwood throwing the football. And speaking of him throwing the football, I mean, this wide receiver core, I think is pretty decent, man. I like Donovan McCulley. All right, coming over there from Indiana, I think he's a pretty good athlete there. Um, he's had success before. Uh, Samaj Morgan, I think, is a very good option. Of course, you look at the stats, and you're like, oh, he didn't even have 200 yards. It's like, okay, like who had more than 200 yards on that team besides Colson Loveland, right? Frederick Moore, Anthony Simpson coming over from UMass is an interesting option there too. Like, not the flashiest big name wide receiver room in the Big Ten. I mean, uh, people can argue about where they see this wide receiver room fitting in terms of how talented are you compared to the rest of the Big Ten. But I think this is enough to give Bryce Underwood some options to catch the football in his first year at quarterback.
Yeah, I didn't think missing a guy like Tyler Morris, you were expecting him to kind of jump into what Roman Anthony was for you a couple years ago in that title run, and then like complement with Samaj Morgan, his run after catch, Frederick Moore hoping to step up. It just didn't come together for many reasons, right? But I think this wide receiver group I think will just look better being in a more functional offense. And you talked about McCulley. He's a guy that really flashed at times in Indiana, fell out of graces with the last coaching staff with Kirk Cignetti. He could be really fun. You're bringing in Anthony Sampson from UMass, a guy I'll be interested to see. I know he's probably a little bit buried this year. Is going to be a Marion Stewart. He was a guy, an interesting recruit. I thought was that always kind of caught my eye during his recruitment and what he can do with the ball in his hands. Coming from the Midwest here, so that would be really interesting if you get a dynamic playmaker, run after the catch kind of guy, similarly to what Samaj Morgan gives you, but maybe something a little bit more versatile than that. But yeah, it's not like it's bare. I mean, you got a bunch of talent, a lot of scholarships, in this room here. So they obviously understand the importance of it and try to get better play this year than you've seen last year.
Yeah, and at the tight end spot, like losing Colson Loveland is pretty massive. I mean, like He was really good, like exceptional, special, unique talent playing the tight end spot that you don't see every day in college football. However, I mean, Klein, Hansen, Bredesen, I think you feel really good about that room, though, still. Not from a high ceiling perspective, that you saw with Colston Loveland, but uh, these guys are willing blockers, like they're going to get after it. And they're going to be a definite benefit to this run game, which I'm not sure that Colson Loveland did a decent job of that. But we know Colson Loveland's talent is, more so in space, getting open, making contested catches, doing his thing, right? From that perspective, offense, generating offense. I think these guys can do a lot here. So I'm excited about this group. Uh, I think you're 4 or 5 deep here, guys that I think you could just let let go and let them play.
Yeah, I think losing Loveland obviously, is a huge deal. But yeah, I don't think this is going to be a bad Big Ten group. Is it going to be worse? There's no one in this room that's going to be a Colson Loveland type. No, no, and that's just unfair expectations. This guy was literally the 10th overall pick as a tight end in this year's draft. It went over Tyler Warren, who was one of the more dominant tight ends we've ever seen in the last decade. Right up there with Kyle Pitts and Brock Bowers. So that's gotta that's gotta mean for something. He was about the only thing that you could rely upon consistently, almost maybe to a negative where you just kind of zeroed in on him and maybe threw some ill-advised passes. One guy I will bring up here is Hogan Hansen, a guy that the staff is pretty high about 6'5", about 240, up to 240 now after coming in a little bit lighter as a high school recruit. If you talk about someone who can be a little bit more dynamic with the ball in their hands, if Marlon Klein doesn't take that step that they want him to, Hogan Hansen's a guy, even though he's battling injuries right now, I know that. I do think that staff wants to utilize him. And obviously, you're breaking in a true freshman quarterback. Yeah, having him have a safety blanket of a talented tight end room would be really nice.
And then going to the offensive line here, yeah, I mean, it wasn't amazing. You had some injuries. You didn't. You were pretty one dimensional. You had what, like 8 or 9 guys play like over 150 snaps last year. So you lose a few guys, but for the most part, you're bringing a lot of this talent back that you had last year. You're just going to have not such a one-dimensional offense. So if some of these guys make the jump that they can, you didn't have any real like all Big Ten kind of like level talent across this offensive line. And to be fair, you were replacing a lot from the year before. It was in a group that I think everyone expected to be a lot better than they were, but it doesn't mean that they can't be, right, significantly better in 2025. So I would actually project that they do get a lot better in 2025.
Yeah, I'd hope so. I do think the injury to the true freshman, right, Babaloa, 5-star kid, is tough. I know he was pushing for playing time. A guy that just is a really good athlete for you. Obviously, you don't want to love that to rely upon a true freshman. If he was going to beat out a guy that started last year left tackle, why not? I think you expect Link to make a leap, and then Frazier comes back from injury. Hopefully, gives you some flexibility inside and outside. Um, yeah, it's like you said, it's not a bad group. I don't think. It's also one that has high expectations. Like this is Michigan, and this is Sharon Moore's Michigan, so even more so, it should be a very good offensive line. And obviously, it has to be with breaking in Bryce Underwood. You don't want him having to deal with a lot of guys in his face and understand that kind of thing. And I think we'll get a real test early on with Oklahoma and what they bring to the table with some of their pass rushers in that front seven. So, and obviously, Venables also has been known to dial up the blitz. So if you're not ready for that, stunting, communication, working some of these guys in, it'll get exposed, and you could have a real trouble in Norman. But yeah, I think I'm with you. This group should get better and should just look more fluid and give Chip Lindsey options to call plays.
Yeah, and it's clear that Lindsey and Moore and Newsom, they all think that this is a solid. I mean, you didn't really invest heavily in the portal. Like you didn't go get one of the big name guys, which you probably could have. Like if you think about it, like from a potential playing time perspective, I think you could have offered, some of the top offensive linemen in the transfer portal, an opportunity to play here in Michigan, but they didn't think that they needed that. They went and invested at other positions of need. They went and invested at running back. They went and invested at wide receiver, of course, at quarterback. Defensively, they try to get some pieces as well, but not a huge investment here on the offensive line in the portal, which makes me believe that they think that they have something here. And by the way, they got some really nice talent here, young talent, like 2026 and beyond. Like, this could be some really stinking good offensive lines for Michigan in the future. So, even if it's not perfect in 2025, I think you fans got a lot to look forward to from this group in the future. And I'm not out on Grant Newsom. I mean, gosh, this is his first year. Let's cut him some slack. It's tough to come into that situation, after, winning a national championship and the cabinet's basically being bare from an offensive perspective. So I'm I'm very optimistic about this offense. Where is it going to rank in terms of offenses in the Big Ten? I don't know. We'll talk about the schedule later. You brought it up briefly. Going to be some interesting matchups that you're going to have to perform and score points offensively because while this defense should be really good, all right, and Wink Martindale is a great defensive coordinator in my opinion, you're still losing a lot. All right. Like it's not going to be the same looks that you were able to give last year where, like you had mentioned before, you were willing yourself to stay in ball games with this defense and special teams. So, I mean, from a defensive line perspective, you're losing Mason Graham, you're losing Kenneth Grant, you're losing Josiah Stewart. All were NFL, all Big Ten guys. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant obviously went in the first round. They were nuts. Josiah Stewart was one of the better edge rushers in the Big Ten and even for college football for that matter. So, what are we looking here, CD, on this defensive line? How do they replace what they lost? And are we still feeling good from top to bottom from a depth perspective as well with the gauntlet that's going to be this Big Ten schedule?
Yeah, it feels like just about every year now we're seeing this defensive line having to replace, top 60 picks, guys that have been impact players for them. And yeah, this year's no different. Obviously, the headliners, a couple first round tackles going. So I'll start in that room here. You're looking at Rayshawn Benny. You're looking at Trey Williams and Damon Payne, a couple of transfers. So Rayshawn Benny is very familiar to Michigan fans. I know he got banged up in that bowl game, but he sounds like he's primed and ready to kind of take over and be the next of an elite continuation of Michigan defensive linemen and kind of pump himself out into the NFL draft. We'll see about Trey Williams and Damon Payne. Those are guys who have played a good amount of football and are also like 23, 22 years old, right? Guys that have been around the block. So that's really nice to see. And they give you size too. It's like size, athleticism, and prospect pedigree, power forward. Like Clemson and Bama wanted him for a reason, and they also played there too. Payne's a guy I thought flashed at times too. He will be an interesting piece, I think. Maybe not going to start, maybe not play a whole lot, but I think in times he does play. I would like to see him be pretty active in there. And then you got a couple other guys behind them that are also like juniors and seniors and graduate students. So like, yeah, the upside, you don't have a Mason Graham there. You don't have a Kenny Grant. I think Rashawn Benny can be very good. And I think Williams and Payne can give you a above average play in the Big Ten, which is still a really freaking good unit because you got some nice guys on the outside there. I would expect it to take a little step back. I'm not going to sit here and say this is going to be literally one of the best defensive lines we've seen because we saw them just take over games. Now, it will be interesting to see if they can start doing that, and then you can start to let those linebackers run free, some playmakers and athletes in that secondary. You could see this round into an elite defense. But the upside, I think, for this defense here is probably in this defensive line group, and specifically, I think with the edge group and some of the pass rushers that they have there.
Yeah, I mean, Derek Moore and TJ Guy playing in I won't say limited capacity because they both had over 400 snaps, but they combined for well over 60 pressures, just the two of them. And that is more than Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant provided. Derek Moore had the same amount of pressures as Josiah Stewart last year, but you're still looking at guys that are really solid. Now, Derek Moore just maybe didn't get home to the quarterback, as many times as Josiah Stewart did, but I think you still have phenomenal talent, across this defensive line and from a depth perspective, like you were talking about, and bringing in those transfers just maybe adds another level to this thing and more bodies, more tools that Wink Martindale is going to get to use on this side of the ball. So I'm very confident in those edge rushers, and then Rayshon Benny is also just a very good player there in the middle. Trey Pierce. I mean, it's going to be a good unit, and it is going to be amplified by the fact that this linebacking core playing behind the defensive line is one of, if not the best in college football with Hausman and Barham.
Yeah, I think maybe they are the best. I don't think it's crazy to say that. I could sit here and would not blink an eye when I'm talking about that. What they can do up and down the field, sideline to sideline. If you want them blitzing, they can do a little bit of that too. But also like just playing behind the defensive line, you saw it like just be really freaking good. And then you throw in Jimmy Rolder too, and just why not? A senior 4-star kid that's been around the block too, and I mean, I don't see like elite high end upside, in the back end in 2025, right? Outside of Hausman and Barnes. So like you will see a big drop off there. Some injuries do happen because those guys can have such an impact on you. I know they at some point were massive, massive transfers. Guys that had success in the Big Ten before heading to Michigan and played a lot last year and did very well. So it's a group that I think is the best in college football. And I'm going to say that right now. I don't know if there's much else to say about it. I know you like some other groups and whatever else, but I feel pretty confident in saying that. And it's exciting that they're still back together and they get to kind of learn from each other, grow in this Wink Martindale defense of scheme.
Yeah, you're probably gonna get lots of fans coming at you in the comment from their team, like, "Oh, my team's linebacking core is better than this team's." Um, we'll see. I mean, who is the best linebacking core, in college football? But a lot of it, whoever you think the best offensive or linebacking core in the country is, right? Is the linebacking core that you're thinking of playing behind this defensive line?
Yeah.
Like, that's also what you have to think about. So this front seven is going to be nasty. It's going to be good. And you're playing against some teams you're playing against some good offensive lines, but you're also playing against some offensive lines that I think have serious question marks or need vast improvement if they're going to want to succeed against Michigan. And you look at Ohio State, their offensive line is probably ready to go against them. Uh, USC's offensive line is pretty good, but like, are we ready to say that this Michigan front seven won't dominate Wisconsin or Nebraska or even Oklahoma's offensive line? So this is going to be a very interesting front seven to look at and watch throughout the year. I'm excited. Got a lot of nice bodies and athletes in there. The
Yeah. One
secondary
thing
is
I'll
the
add to that.
one.
Yeah,
Oh,
real quick.
sure.
I'm sorry. In terms of like what these linebackers will see, I think it is important to notice too that, or to note that a lot of the quarterbacks that are on their schedule in games that are not necessarily toss ups, but part of like their toss ups, if you're trying to go through win total, are like athletic quarterbacks, guys that can get out of the pocket. So those linebackers and edge rushers are going to be that much more important, as well as those interior defensive linemen to put pressure like coming up from the middle so they can't step up into these lanes. You're looking at John Mateer at Oklahoma. Even Raiola can do a little bit with his legs, but Billy Edwards, Jaden Maeva, Damon Williams, Aiden Childs, even Malik Washington from Maryland. Like a lot of guys that can give defenses fits there. But this defense right here in that front seven specifically, I feel pretty good saying that it's pretty well fit to attack some of those quarterbacks and schemes that they'll be seeing.
So then, how are you feeling about this secondary group? I mean, when you're playing behind that kind of front seven, and they're gonna, if they get home to the quarterback, like they probably should this year, like the secondary matters, but it doesn't matter as much, right? I mean, like this is still, I think, going to be a solid group. But what are we expecting from the secondary group for Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the return of Rod Moore is something that's exciting for fans. I do worry a little bit about his injury, and it was a pretty serious injury, and it took him a while to recover fully from that. But if he's back out there and even close to 80%, 85% of what he's been, he's still a really freaking good player for you and a valuable guy to get guys in the right spots and himself being in right spots for quarterbacks to deal with. And then obviously at cornerback, I think this is where you see some of your positions start. Like this is one of your positions that you feel pretty good about, especially the talent plus like production last year, and then you kind of project some of that growth that you'll see specifically from Jair Hill. He's a guy that was battling for that cornerback 2 spot last year opposite Will Johnson. And it wasn't pretty all the time, but you saw it. You saw it, man. Sometimes that potential. And you see him stay with it. Sounds like he's having a guy that's having a really good fall camp. It's starting to come together with him athletically and what he can do. And then opposite him would be Zeke Berry, a guy that was pretty good last year. You know, he had injuries too to Will Johnson, and he was a guy that I think can give you some versatility. But yeah, I feel pretty good about him lining up opposite Hill.
I mean, yeah, I think Michigan fans were probably disappointed in Zeke Berry, relative to the level of defensive back play that they've seen on this team the last couple years. If Zeke Berry takes a big jump, I think this secondary, yeah, could absolutely be lethal. But I'll disagree with you a little bit on him. I think there's definite room for improvement there. But he's got the tools, Probably played. He played over 600 snaps last year for you, Zeke Berry. So if he plays another 600 snaps, I think he's got to improve if you want to take this thing to the next level. But fortunately for you, you got a front seven, like I said, that's going to be getting home and putting some serious pressure on a lot of these quarterbacks. So yeah, and I think that the Metcalfs are a solid addition to the secondary. Uh, Definitely a wait and see. You're just expecting improvement. It's kind of what we're sitting here and just speculating. And if you get that, it's just going to be a nice little cherry on top of this defense if they end up being pretty solid in that secondary spot.
Yeah,
Now,
the Metcalfs, they're coming over from Arkansas. TJ, that staff seems to be talking pretty highly of him in fall camp. We'll be interested to see where he's slotted at in terms of if he's playing nickel, if he's playing safety. But they seem to feel pretty good about him. And then obviously, like you got Brandon Hillman, Mason Curtis, Jaden Mangham, a couple guys that have played for you and done okay at times. But yeah, I just want to throw that out there with Metcalf. Could be a guy that could really pop, especially early in that season.
yeah, and it's nice to add on, or sorry, to move on to special teams unit. It'll be nice, right, not having to go for it, on certain fourth down situations because you have probably the best kicker, if not one of the best kickers in college football, and Dominic Zvada over there, just going to being able to pull up, from the 40-yard line and expect those kicks to go in is quite a treat to have if you're the Michigan Wolverines. And in some of these games, like you talked about, like where the margins are going to be so small, like that's the difference, right? That's the difference in some of these games too. And also field position, like from your defense, like a kicker and your defense complement each other so well. Like if you get great field position as a defense and you're able to accomplish that consistently, which Michigan's been able to do the last couple of years, having an elite kicker matters that much more when you're getting that kind of field position. It amplifies it. So football is a complementary game. I think that's one aspect that people, overlook quite a bit. But let's move on to the schedule unless you had something else to add to their special teams unit. You look at some of these toss-up games. They're over under win total, sitting at 9.5. I think for a lot of people, that's a lot of wins. Or sorry, I think it's actually sitting at 8.5 right now. At minus 160, unless you're seeing it at 9.5 somewhere else, CD.
And that over 9.5 is plus 140. So I mean,
uh, Let's just call it 9 then.
Ooh, okay, that changes
We'll pick
things.
it at 9. I don't know if anyone offers 9, but for the sake of the show, we'll pick it at 9. That means you gotta to cash the over. You gotta win double digit games. All right. Ohio State, I think at Michigan State, Washington, USC, Nebraska, and Oklahoma are all games on your radar that you're like, okay, we could lose these games. Can you go 4-2 in those games? Is the question. When two of your bigger, or three of those games, sorry, four of those games are on the road as
Yeah,
well, which
and then
makes
Ohio
that a lot
State.
more difficult. And then, of course, Ohio State, who you've been able to handle the last, however many years it's been running right now, but still going to be a very good team. Still going to be tough. I lean 8-4 more than I lean 10-2. Not a play for me at all. Literally at all. Could not be less of a play because I don't know what's going to happen. From an offensive perspective with this quarterback situation. I mean, Bryce Underwood could be really good. I'm expecting him, even if you project him to be above average, or are you going to get to 10 wins? I don't know. So I'll lean under here, but love the defense, of course. Is anticipating improvement on the offensive line, which I think is going to matter because you look at the schedule too and you see some pretty decent defensive lines, but nothing really overbearing until you get to Ohio State. Oklahoma has a good defensive line too, but I'll roll with the lean to the under, but don't feel great about that. I'm sure Michigan fans are going to be here to disagree with me on that one.
Yeah, it is hard to get the taste of last year and really the sight of last year's offense out of the mind just because of, how tough it was at times to really watch. And we were talking a little bit off air, like what happens if Mikey Keene is the quarterback last year and how many more games do they win? You're probably looking at a playoff contender, a serious playoff contender in terms of like being down there in November and December and having a case to make the playoffs in the 12-team era.
And that's Mikey Keene,
And that's
right?
Mikey
That's your
Keene.
backup quarterback probably going into this season.
Yeah, and last year's schedule was probably harder than this year. Although I do expect like it's hard because I look at the schedule and I'm seeing Nebraska and I'm seeing USC and I'm seeing Washington and even Michigan State in the Big Ten, and those are teams I just expect to get a little bit better this year, if not significantly better, or like teams that are just dangerous. And it's so hard to question mark that is Bryce Underwood and where I want to slot him in these games. I'm trying to go through and be like, okay, who is a coach and quarterback edge? And I just don't know with Underwood yet. Like, if you told me by October, like he is a better quarterback than Jade Maeva, I would probably be surprised. But also at this point, it's like, wow, that'd be crazy. Now, I do not expect that, right? I do not expect that. I think that's unrealistic expectation for Bryce Underwood. I don't think that's fair for him. But the reality is, I think with this schedule to get to 10 wins, you're going to need like serious consistency at the quarterback position. And I think it's going to be hard to get. Like the ups are going to be so high and the lows, I think, could cost you in a couple of these games here. I'm going to go the under. I do feel a lot better about under 9.5 than I do under 9, just because I do think 9-3 is a very reasonable spot for Michigan fans. And I think in a year that you're almost building, like you look at this roster, now defensively, it would hurt to see that front seven, and a lot of those guys will be graduating next year. Although that's like nothing new for you guys. You guys have been dealing with that. It seems like for 4 years now. But in terms of building for 2026 and beyond, and just getting back to where you were at a couple years ago, yeah, I'm gonna go under here. But it wouldn't surprise me either. That Oklahoma game in week 2 is going to tell us, I think, a lot about both of those rosters because there's question marks at quarterback, question marks just like new and like change at the offensive coordinator positions, offensive lines coming together. Like I think it'll be a really nice test. Like Oklahoma almost feels like a Michigan type team in the Big Ten where they could really, really give teams problem at the top end. And then Michigan, obviously, when what they can do and seen them do to really good football teams in the past. So yeah, I'm gonna go under here. This will be a team we'll be following pretty closely, I think, because of the significant amount of important games that they play in the Big Ten here. So a lot of fun. But yeah, I do expect a little bit under here.